Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing great out there. So, welcome to yet another lecture of MCOM 404, which is community journalism. And today we'll learn how to write community news and what are those essentials in order to write news stories for community journalism. So, I hope you can see this PowerPoint on your screens. So, let's start. Writing community news. So, as you know, news media are widely regarded as important tool for national development. I'm talking about the national news network. So we can call community journalism as a branch of development journalism and can apply the same techniques as applied in writing development news, because most of the time we are reporting development projects or development of a community. So as the major function of both is to work for the betterment of society. National media works in a larger scale, while community media work for on a smaller scale. So in development news, the journalist should critically evaluate and report the relevance of a development project. So the difference, the planned scheme and its actual implementation, and the difference between its impact on people as claimed by the government officials and as it is actually is. So the development is a complex phenomenon, and development communication is a systematic use of communication for national development. So furthermore, how development journalism should be practiced depends largely on how the term development is defined. So development can be defined into a whole lot different connotations. So development is a widely participatory process of directed social change in a society intended to bring about both social and material advancement and achievements, including greater quality freedom and the other valued qualities for the majority of people through their gaining greater control over the environment. So development news covers a wide range of subjects. So like health, environment, education, socio-economic, cultural issues, communication and transportation, agriculture, corruption, governance, natural disaster, corruption, etc., etc. Uh, so how we define development news? So news relating to the primary, secondary, and tertiary needs of a developing country. Primary needs are food, clothing, and shelter. Secondary needs are development of agriculture, industry, and all economic activities which lead to the fulfillment of the primary needs, plus development of education, literacy, health, environment, medical research, family planning, employment, labor, welfare, social reforms, national integration, and rural and urban development. So tertiary need are development of mass media, transportation, tourism, telecommunication, arts, and cultural activities. So in context of development news, the media is used as a platform for people to express what is important to them rather than bringing a channel for the government or political elite to push their own agendas. So a newspaper is considered as giving emphasis to development activities if the newspaper devoted a higher proportion of space to development news or publish a larger number of stories related to development activities and with the relevant photo or graphics or videos or whatever is necessary. So when we talk about development, we need to understand what are the main objectives of the development news are. So here are some: to give voice to the people, to create a forum for exchange of information, opinion, and experiences, to inform the people about development activities in the area, because sometimes there are a lot going on around you, but you don't know what's going on because lack of those information or communication channels. Then to strengthen democratic process and practicing by creating dialogue between people and the decision maker. So, there is always been a gap between the people who are sitting on a higher seats and people who are on the receiving ends, like common people and political elites. So there is always a gap. So the basic purpose of a development news is to actually shorten that gap and bring both the candidates on a talking table, on a discussion table, to basically start a dialogue on issues that matter to the people who are on the receiving ends. Some of the problem, the mainstream media is to large extent irrelevant to the concerns of common people. Here we attempt to answer the following questions. So let's see, do the newspaper publish a higher proportion of development news? Ask yourself. I don't think so, especially not in Pakistan. So do they devote a higher proportion of space for development news? Not at all. What were the types of development news topics that are covered so far if you have seen someone? So newspaper devote less space to development stories. Newspaper in developing countries devote a large portion of space for non-development news like politics, sports, crime, etc., etc. But most of the time, it's politics all over news. So official sources are most often quoted in media, main source of news items, political personalities, or government authorities. Development issues do not get special treatment. Newspapers use straight news and features format when presenting development stories. Most of the development news published centered on economic activities because government is actually trying to propagate that what are the great things they are doing. So that's why they talk a lot about economic activity. So how things can be improved? The presentation style and simple language used in news stories make development news very easy to understand. Photos, graphic, illustrations are used more often when reporting development than non-development news items. Stories about social and economic development activities could be as interesting as political stories, provided they are written in a different and more interesting way. How more interesting way? Giving them a human angle. Well-written development stories could inspire people to become more involved in the development process, and the letters concerning development issues should be published more often than the letters with non-development issues. So traditional media. As you know, traditional media includes these news channels, dramas, concerts, songs, storytelling, puppetry, drumming, dancing, local street theater, etc. The urge to express, communicate, and share something beautiful gave birth to the performing arts such as folk and traditional media. Folk performing arts have changed structures continuously over the centuries, modifying to the needs of changing situations, yet continuing to be functionally relevant to society. So tradition suggests a process of the transmission of age-old values and contextual manifestation and interpretation of the universal. Tradition is not only a repetitive behavior pattern or some persistent symbol or motif in community culture, it is also an assertion of an identity, a revival and regeneration of life force of the community. So the traditional media rely on this cultural support and context. So in the context of development programs in rural and marginalized communities where the majority of population reside, community communication process, access points, traditional media, and culturally appropriate communication approaches and content are of particular importance in development communication. So the majority of the world's population live in developing countries and 70% of them live in rural areas, same as the case with Pakistan. So mass media such as newspaper, television, and the internet do not effectively reach to these people, or as many research studies show, the media do not have the required impact in terms of motivating change and development. Here comes the community media. So some of the uses, effective application of development communication approaches and strategies at the grassroots and community level should necessarily involve the use and harnessing of the pervasive traditional communication instrument and resources. So they serve as reliable channels of news and information gathering, processing, and dissemination in many rural communities. They often address local interests and concerns in local language and cultural contexts, which the community members can easily understand and with which they can identify. Traditional media, especially storytelling, songs, drama, and local street theaters, stem from local cultural norms and traditions. Their content is usually couched in culturally appropriate way, and they often serve as effective means of channeling development issues. They can be used in communication, intervention, addressing issues related to improving agriculture productivity, natural resources, and environmental management, and other development problems. Folk arts and traditional media. Folk arts and traditional media are the aesthetic components of the concepts of belonging and affinity in a cultural context. So in traditional societies, art is an integral part of the process of living in the community. So folk performances is a composite art. It is a fusion of elements from music and dance. Puppets are increasingly being used as a strategy for addressing varied development issues such as education, children, encouraging scientific methods of farming, promoting the use of fertilizers, etc., etc. And it's happening in all over the Africa and South Asia as well. So during the general elections in developing countries, members of the various political parties use folk songs for campaigning and presented humorous skits to ridicule the opposition's candidates and win support for their own candidates. Probably you have seen all this in Pakistani elections as well, and in the campaigns of different political parties. They always produce a song of their party, and then they conduct a lot of gatherings and processions. So in that, they actually broadcast those songs and those skits and everything in order to ridicule the other parties. So, for example, in 1940s, the traditional theater of Bengal became a symbol for the anti-colonial struggle, and the Bengali elite, who had previously ignored or disintegrated traditional theater, began to give importance to these performing arts. Rabindranath Tagore and others advocated the use of traditional theater in programs of cultural revival and anti-colonial protest in the context of rural fairs and festivals. Peasants, agricultural laborers, and rediscovering the potential of folk and traditional performing arts as a weapon in their struggle for land, better health status, better working and living conditions, and human rights. Some of the prerequisites to the use of folk and traditional media: an understanding of the rural audience and the use of these media to provide rural people with entertainment in order to attract their attention and to ensure their participation in development activities. The utilization of folk media in communication programs should be viewed not only from the perspective of the political and socio-economic development, but also from that of cultural development. Folklore needs to retain social authenticity. The folk form has evolved gradually, and whenever they are flexible, they retain their appeal to the rural people. Effort should be made to preserve the originality of each folk form. Adaptation needs not alter nor destroy the form. So main form of folk media should remain intact. Some of the weaknesses, they have, like other media practices, they have their weaknesses and limitations as well. So like other communication information means, they also have weaknesses about their development issues. Not all folk forms can be used for development communication purposes. Thus, they should be carefully studied from the point of view of content and characterization for their possible adaptation for the development process. Folk media production should be consistent with the needs of the social context and related to the customs and beliefs of the local communities. Research and experience in the use of traditional media indicate that they are most effective in communication of development in rural communities when combined with mass communication resources. Collaboration between the folk artist and the media producers is absolutely essential for the successful integration of folk media and mass media communication strategies for development purposes. In sum, traditional media provides horizontal communication approaches to stimulating discussion and analysis of issues, as well as sensitizing and mobilizing communities for development. So, how to write? Preparing is the first thing, or planning is the vital when it comes to writing effective, attractive, and inciting news. A community journalist needs to go to face-finding mission. Community journalism is said to be the relationship journalism, so it is easy to find facts as a journalist, know all the people in the community. After facts have been collected, then preparation should include writing down all major points relating to the story. In doing so, include all the information the public needs to know. Placing your points in descending order from most important to the least important. Do the first few points clearly explain the basics of the story and are they attractive to the readers. Finding an angle or a point of difference to make story more attractive. An example of this is a group's staging an annual festival for the news. They need to think about what is it that is different about this year event. Has it been revamped? Is it bigger or better than ever before? What is planned that make it unique from the previous one and the one before that? So finding a human angle that makes the story warmer, or a hook that makes it more topical, both of these points will make story more attractive to the readers. Grab them early on, the headlines. There should be a bit of kick and a bit of creativity into the headline. Use a famous name, a bad pun, an attractive turn of phrase, or big funding figure. Half the battle is fought over the headline and opening paragraph. So you should remember this. Keep it short and in the active voice. Without doubt, the first couple of paragraphs are the most important part. Explain who, what, where, when, why, and how of the story, and do it early on, that your readers get everything in first instance. If it can't be done, then need to go back to the beginning and refine the message. List the point of interest prepared earlier in the descending order from the most interesting down. Make news active and upbeat. Keep the subject interesting. Try and use quotes that add clarity or can sum up story in a concise and lively manner. Stick to the facts. Do not make outlandish claims that cannot be backed up, and do not oversell. Highlight the benefits, achievements, and positives. Explain the fact in a way that people will benefit from it by going to any event, donating to any cause, working on a particular community project, finding the solution of the problems. Remember the vital details. Ensure that the location and the date and the time of event, announcement, media conference, etc. is included and highlighted. Check and recheck after finishing. Proofread news, read it loud, and then have a friend or colleague to do the same. There may be typos or other errors while doing so, or it could help edit like sound more interesting. So that's it. So we'll actually conclude this module here, and we'll finish. And probably in next week, I'll do some of the live sessions, and then we'll conclude this semester. Till then, thank you very much. Take care of yourself. Allah Hafiz, and stay blessed.